landscape of sports cinema, few genres demand as much technical precision and visceral excitement as racing films. F1 2025, the latest collaboration between Brad Pitt and Top Gun, Maverick, director Joseph Kosinski, arrives with considerable fanfare and impossibly high expectations. This is a film that attempts to merge the raw adrenaline of Formula One racing with the deeply personal narrative of redemption, legacy, and the relentless march of time that waits for no one, not even Hollywood's biggest stars. For Brad Pitt, F1 represents more than just another entry in his impressive filmography. The film arrives at a peculiar moment in the actor's career, one marked by personal controversies and professional transitions. Over the past several years, Pitt has found himself generating more headlines for his tumultuous divorce from Angelina Jolie, a separation reportedly catalyzed by a drunken domestic assault incident during a 2016 plane trip, than for his cinematic achievements. This personal turmoil has inevitably colored public perception of the actor, creating an uncomfortable backdrop against which his recent film choices must be viewed. In his most recent works, including the underwhelming Wolves and the ambitious but divisive Babylon, Pitt has consistently portrayed talented, weathered men whose contemplative stares down mortality seem to mirror the actor's own anxieties about his position in an entertainment industry increasingly hungry for younger, scandal-free faces to fill the void left by aging stars. F1 amplifies these concerns and places them center stage, transforming what could have been a straightforward racing thriller into something that resembles a meta-commentary on celebrity, relevance, and the desperate struggle to remain vital in a world that's constantly moving forward. The story, a familiar formula with high-performance execution. Instead of portraying a character who gracefully accepts the passage of time and his diminishing place in the spotlight, Pitt embodies Sonny Hayes, a former racing prodigy whose dreams of one final championship run are unexpectedly reignited when he receives a surprising offer from Ruben Cervantes' Javier Bardem, a former rival-turned-team owner. The setup is classic sports movie fare, but the execution aims for something grander. The circumstances surrounding Sonny's recruitment are dire. With the majority of the racing season already concluded, Ruben's struggling APXGP racing team hasn't earned a single championship point. The team's failure stems from a combination of factors. Their talented but insufferably conceited young driver Joshua Pearce Damson Idris lacks the hard-won experience necessary to grind out victories in the cutthroat world of Formula One racing. Making matters considerably worse, the team's vehicles, designed by their brilliant but frustrated technical director Kate McKenna, Kerry Condon, simply can't compete with the engineering marvels produced by legendary teams like Ferrari and McLaren. Ruben's desperate hope is that Sonny can accomplish the seemingly impossible, transform both the APXGP team and the immature Joshua enough to secure at least one victory in the team's final 9 races of the season. This single win would provide enough momentum and credibility to hold off nervous investors like the smarmy, corporate-minded Peter Banning, Tobias Menzies, from stripping Ruben of his ownership stake in the team he's poured his heart and soul into building. The narrative framework is undeniably familiar to anyone who has watched sports films over the past several decades. We've seen variations of this story countless times. The aging veteran gets one last shot at glory while simultaneously mentoring a younger, more talented but less disciplined successor. What distinguishes F1 from its predecessors, or what should distinguish it, is the execution, the performances, and the spectacular racing sequences that promise to transport audiences into the cockpit alongside these characters. The Kosinski connection, chasing the Top Gun, Maverick magic. For F1, Pitt's collaboration with Joseph Kosinski represents a strategically calculated decision. The pairing seems almost inevitable when you consider Kosinski's recent triumph with Top Gun, Maverick, a film that accomplished the seemingly impossible task of creating a legacy sequel that not only honored the original but surpassed it in nearly every measurable way. That film struck a delicate balance between nostalgia and innovation, between honoring the past and embracing the future, all while crafting an utterly enthralling adventure about an aging former hotshot tasked with mentoring the next generation of elite pilots. Pitt clearly hoped that Kosinski could replicate this magic formula, substituting fighter jets for Formula One cars and the danger of aerial combat for the equally perilous world of high-speed racing. The actor undoubtedly envisioned F1 as his own Maverick moment, a film that would reaffirm his relevance, showcase his enduring star power, and perhaps rehabilitate his public image in the process. Unfortunately, Kosinski and Pitt only capture a modest portion of the success that made Top Gun, Maverick, such a cultural phenomenon. While F1 is unquestionably an expertly crafted crowd pleaser that delivers on its promise of spectacular racing sequences and high-octane thrills, the film ultimately lacks the emotional resonance that elevated its spiritual predecessor. The critical difference lies in star power and persona. Pitt simply cannot match Tom Cruise's almost supernatural ability to conjoin his carefully cultivated star image with the emotional journey of his character. Cruise has spent decades perfecting the art of making his movies feel like extensions of his public persona, the death-defying stunts, the unwavering commitment to practical effects, the almost manic dedication to entertaining audiences at any cost. When you watch Cruise in Top Gun, Maverick, you're watching both Maverick the character and Tom Cruise the movie star confronting mortality, legacy, and relevance. The two identities blur together seamlessly, creating a deeply affecting viewing experience. Pitt, for all his considerable talents as an actor, doesn't possess this particular skill. The rarely transportive F1 feels cold and machine-like as a result, an ironic quality for a film so obsessed with the warmth of human connection and the passionate love of racing that supposedly drives its protagonist. Comparing racing legacies, where F1 ranks among its predecessors. To fully appreciate what F1 2025 achieves and where it falls short, we must consider it within the context of the racing film genre's most celebrated entries. This film features neither the meditative poetry of Lee H. Katzin's Le Mans, nor the philosophical existentialism of Tony Scott's Days of Thunder, nor the emotionally vulnerable masculinity of James Mangold's Ford vs. Ferrari. Steve McQueen's Le Mans remains the gold standard for racing films that prioritize authenticity and atmosphere over conventional narrative. That film featured minimal dialogue and allowed the racing itself, the sounds, the speed, the danger, to tell the story. It was a mood piece, an experiential film that placed audiences directly into McQueen's world. Tony Scott's Days of Thunder, while more conventionally plotted, explored themes of identity, fear, and the psychological toll of repeatedly risking one's life for glory. Tom Cruise's Cold Trickle wasn't just a racer, he was a young man grappling with his own limitations, fears, and the realization that talent alone wasn't enough to guarantee success. James Mangold's Ford vs. Ferrari arguably represents the most emotionally sophisticated racing film of the past decade, a movie that used the 1966 Le Mans race as the backdrop for a meditation on friendship, corporate politics, artistic integrity, and the cost of pursuing perfection. Christian Bale and Matt Damon delivered performances of remarkable depth, creating fully realized human beings rather than racing archetypes. F1, by contrast, is a loud, muscular movie about mentorship and stardom that hews much closer in tone and theme to Oliver Stone's Any Given Sunday, perhaps Any Given Speedway, would be a more appropriate comparison. Like Stone's football epic, Kosinski's film has pointed things to say about what constitutes modern celebrity, how athletes navigate the attention economy, and the generational tensions that arise when old-school values collide with new-school priorities. Tone and character. Kosinski's film begins with a disorienting, fragmented memory of a brutal crash, its violent images interrupted and softened by fantasy sequences of crushing ocean waves. This impressionistic opening immediately establishes the film's central tension, the traumatic past that haunts Sonny Hayes versus the peace and escape he seeks. The recollection belongs to Sonny, who we discover is catching some much-needed shut-eye in his van before preparing to hop back into his race car. It's the legendary 24 hours of Daytona endurance race, and Sonny has drawn the grueling midnight shift. When he awakens, we watch him go through a ritual that speaks volumes about his character. He devours several peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for quick energy, dunks his face in ice water to shock his system into alertness, cranks out a set of pull-ups to activate his muscles, and then climbs into his car to speed through a barrage of competing vehicles, all set to the thunderous classic rock of Led Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love.
This invigorating opening scene is F1, at its absolute best, a perfect marriage of character development, visceral action, and precisely chosen musical accompaniment. It establishes Sonny as a working-class racer who approaches his craft with workmanlike dedication rather than glamorous excess. Unfortunately, this scene also sets the stage for a movie that never really slows down. never takes time to breathe, never allows its emotional moments to properly land. The film rapidly increases its pace from this already high-speed opening. We quickly zoom through Ruben's impassioned plea for Sonny to join his struggling team, then watch Sonny participate in a high-stakes trial run at APXGP's London track designed to prove he still possesses the necessary skills, and then we hurtle through Sonny and Joshua's disastrous performance at the Spanish Grand Prix. This immediate immersion in the accelerated world of Formula One racing is undeniably thrilling from a pure adrenaline perspective. The problem is that we can predict every turn Sonny's character arc will take from a considerable distance, which paradoxically slows our desire to fully invest in his journey. When a film moves this quickly but follows such a predictable path, the speed becomes less exhilarating and more exhausting. The generational divide, old school versus new school. Like Oliver Stone's Any Given Sunday, the dramatic engine-driving F1 is predicated on a strained, fraught relationship between an older white veteran with hard-won wisdom, Sonny, and a younger black talent whose self-absorption threatens to undermine his considerable gifts, Joshua. This dynamic is handled with more sensitivity than Stone's occasionally heavy-handed approach, but it still traffics in some problematic racial and generational assumptions. As you might expect, Sonny represents the complete opposite of everything Joshua embodies. A former phenom whose promising career was derailed by a catastrophic fiery crash that severely damaged his back 3 decades ago, Sonny doesn't race for money, fame, or social media followers. He bounces restlessly from small dirt tracks to prestigious international speedways with the singular aim of preserving and nurturing an ineffable, almost spiritual love of driving. For Sonny, racing isn't a means to an end, it is the end, the thing itself, the pure expression of skill, courage, and passion. Joshua, conversely, is portrayed as far more interested in his social media engagement metrics and follower counts than the actual wins and losses that should define a serious competitor. He shows little interest in uplifting his team or contributing to a collective effort. Instead, Joshua races well enough to position himself for a lucrative jump to a more established team that can offer him greater money, wider exposure, and more prestigious sponsorship deals. The easygoing charisma that Brad Pitt brings to Sonny and the bewitching screen presence that Damson Idris delivers as Joshua create enough megawatt star power to smooth over some of the inherently problematic dynamics embedded in this older white savior, essentially putting his younger black counterpart in his place. When Sonny challenges Joshua to tune out the external noise and social media distractions in favor of focusing on the craft of racing itself, you can sense Pitt making a dual argument. First, for an era of stardom and celebrity that predated social media's corrosive influence, and second, for his own continued relevance amid a rapidly shifting Hollywood landscape that increasingly values youth, diversity, and controversy-free public images. This double-edged appeal will likely engender considerable sympathy from audience members who hold Pitt dear and harbor nostalgia for an earlier, ostensibly purer era of movie stardom. However, this same quality holds Sonny back from developing into anything more complex than a symbol of old-school values, a walking embodiment of how things used to be, rather than a fully realized human being with contradictions, flaws, and genuine vulnerabilities. Character development, smooth sailing and missed opportunities. The consequence of Sonny's symbolic function is that he navigates the movie almost entirely unchallenged. He effortlessly wins the unfailing support and loyalty of a previously dysfunctional pit crew and, through sheer force of personality and competence, transforms them into a fast, efficient, synchronized team. The film presents these victories as inevitable rather than hard-won, robbing them of dramatic tension. Sonny does engage in some light romantic flirtation with Kate McKenna, the team's talented technical director, and Carrie Condon deserves considerable credit for making a meal out of what is essentially a one-dimensional character defined almost entirely by her professional competence and her potential romantic interest in the protagonist. However, both Sonny and cinematographer Claudio Miranda's camera remain surprisingly, almost inexplicably chaste in their treatment of this potential relationship. The film seems uncertain whether it wants to develop this romantic subplot or leave it as mere suggestion, ultimately doing neither particularly well. The film is also structurally and thematically wrestled away from Joshua's perspective and character development. If Kosinski and screenwriter Aaron Kruger, who also penned Top Gun, Maverick, genuinely intended for F1 to function as a passing of the torch from one generation to the next, a narrative structure that would align it more closely with Top Gun, Maverick, the film doesn't easily support that interpretation. Pitt's Sonny never seems ready or willing to anoint a successor, to genuinely step aside and let the younger generation claim the spotlight. Instead, the film's restless, somewhat unsatisfying ending plays more like The Defiant Ones, the classic 1958 film in which the black character's dreams and aspirations are ultimately displaced and sacrificed in favor of his white counterpart's journey and redemption. This narrative choice feels particularly unfortunate given the contemporary moment in which the film arrives. Modern audiences and critics are increasingly attuned to issues of representation, narrative equity, and whose stories get centered in mainstream Hollywood productions. F1 2025 had the opportunity to subvert racing film conventions by genuinely sharing the narrative spotlight between Sonny and Joshua, allowing both characters equal development and equally satisfying arcs. Instead, it defaults to a more traditional, hierarchical structure that reinforces existing power dynamics both within the story and within the film industry itself. Technical excellence, where F1 truly excels. The thematic and narrative shortcomings of F1 2025 don't completely distract from the sublime excitement and technical mastery that the racing sequences provide. This is where the film absolutely delivers on its promises and justifies its existence as a theatrical experience rather than a streaming release. Hans Zimmer's dynamic, propulsive score represents some of the legendary composer's most exciting work in recent years. This is a churning, meticulously sculpted piece of music that doesn't just accompany the racing sequences but actively participates in them, rising and falling with the action, building tension during close competitions, and releasing that tension in triumphant crescendos when victories are achieved. Zimmer's score not only perfectly matches editor Stephen Mirion's elegant, precise cutting, which manages to maintain spatial clarity even during the most frenetic racing sequences, but also creates wonderful juxtapositions with cinematographer Claudio Miranda's kinetic camera work. Miranda's lens is in constant motion, jostling violently within the car's cockpit, throttling around impossibly tight curves, pulling back to capture the larger choreography of multiple cars navigating complex tracks, then diving back into intimate close-ups of drivers' eyes visible through their helmets. We experience the racing from multiple perspectives and distances, creating a comprehensive sense of both the individual driver's experience and the larger competitive context. Sometimes the sequences deliberately evoke Tony Scott's Days of Thunder. Jerry Bruckheimer, who produced that film, also serves as a producer here, particularly when Sonny makes his signature move of angling to go high on the track, using unconventional racing lines to overtake opponents who assume he'll follow more traditional paths. At other points in the film, particularly when the APXGP team fully commits to Sonny's aggressive, combative racing philosophy, F1 becomes its own snarling beast with admittedly little grounding in technical reality. Seriously, what exactly is Sonny's revolutionary strategy beyond drive harder and take more risks? But the sequences remain viscerally entertaining nonetheless. The racing cinematography benefits enormously from the production's unprecedented access to actual Formula One events, tracks, and equipment. Kosinski and his team shot during real race weekends, integrating their fictional APXGP team into actual racing environments. This commitment to authenticity pays tremendous dividends in terms of visual credibility. The racing sequences feel genuinely dangerous and spatially coherent in ways that entirely studio-bound productions can never quite achieve, no matter how sophisticated their special effects might be. Pacing and runtime, a paradox of speed. Despite its considerable 156-minute runtime, a length that would sink many lesser films, F1 doesn't lumber or rumble through its duration. Instead, it absolutely flies by, maintaining relentless forward momentum that mirrors the racing it depicts. This represents both the film's greatest strength and one of its more subtle weaknesses. On the positive side, the film never feels boring or indulgent. Scenes are cut with precision, rarely overstaying their welcome. The racing sequences are strategically distributed throughout the runtime, ensuring that the audience never goes too long without experiencing the visceral thrills that represent the film's primary appeal. For viewers seeking pure entertainment and spectacle, F1 delivers consistent satisfaction. However, this relentless pacing also means the film rarely pauses for genuine character moments, for quiet scenes that might allow the relationships and emotional stakes to properly develop. Everything feels somewhat rushed, even during ostensibly intimate conversations between characters. The film seems perpetually anxious, unable to trust that audiences will remain engaged without constant stimulation.
This pacing issue particularly undermines the mentorship relationship between Sonny and Joshua. We see them progress from mutual distrust to grudging respect to genuine partnership, but we don't really feel this evolution occurring. The transformation happens because the script requires it to happen, not because the film has invested sufficient time and emotional energy into making it feel earned and organic. Thematic ambitions. What F1 tries to say about racing and life. Though F1 has frustratingly little to say about Formula One's complicated past, its controversial present, or its uncertain future, the film does attempt to engage with larger themes about legacy, relevance, and the cost of pursuing excellence in any field. The sport of Formula One itself provides rich material for thematic exploration that the film largely ignores. This is a sport with a complex relationship to safety, having been responsible for numerous driver deaths over the decades before implementing more stringent safety measures. It's a sport with troubling environmental implications in an era of climate crisis. It's a sport struggling with issues of diversity and inclusion, both in terms of driver representation and fan access. It's a sport where technological innovation constantly threatens to overshadow human skill, raising questions about what we're actually celebrating when we watch these races. F1 touches on virtually none of these issues in any substantive way. The film seems content to exist in a somewhat sanitized, generic version of Formula One racing rather than engaging with the sport's specific culture, controversies, and characteristics. This represents a significant missed opportunity to ground the film's personal drama in a larger, more meaningful context. What the film does explore, somewhat more successfully, is the psychology of risk-taking and the addictive quality of high-performance competition. Sonny's character embodies the type of person who cannot function normally in everyday life, who requires the heightened stakes and adrenaline of racing to feel truly alive. The film suggests, though never fully explores, that this might represent a kind of dysfunction, an inability to find meaning and purpose in safer, more sustainable pursuits. The script also attempts to examine how different generations approach fame, success, and public image. Sonny represents an older model of celebrity that kept personal and professional lives more separated, that measured success primarily through professional achievements rather than cultural influence. Joshua embodies the modern celebrity athlete who understands that success extends far beyond wins and losses into personal branding, social media presence, and cultural relevance. Neither approach is presented as entirely correct or incorrect, which represents one of the film's more nuanced achievements. Sonny's disdain for social media and modern celebrity culture can read as admirable authenticity or stubborn refusal to adapt. Joshua's attention to his public image can seem like shallow narcissism or savvy professional management of his career assets. Performances. Elevating familiar material. The cast of F1 deserves considerable credit for elevating material that could have felt extremely shop-worn in less capable hands. Brad Pitt brings his considerable movie star charisma to Sonny Hayes, creating a character who remains watchable and sympathetic even when the script doesn't provide him with particularly complex material to work with. Pitt's performance relies heavily on his physical presence and his ability to convey volumes through minimal dialogue. He portrays Sonny as a man of action rather than words, someone more comfortable in a race car than in conversation. This approach works well during the racing sequences but occasionally makes the dramatic scenes feel somewhat inert, as if we're watching Pitt perform, grizzled veteran, rather than inhabiting a specific human being. Damson Idris faces the more challenging task as Joshua Pearce, a character who must begin the film as insufferably arrogant before gradually revealing hidden depths and genuine vulnerability. Idris navigates this transformation skillfully, finding moments of humanity even when Joshua is at his most self-absorbed. His chemistry with Pitt feels genuine, creating a believable sense of two very different people learning to understand and respect each other. Javier Bardem brings warmth and complexity to what could have been a thankless role as team owner Ruben Cervantes. Bardem invests Ruben with passion, desperation, and a sense of history that the script only hints at. You believe that this team represents Ruben's life work, that its potential failure would devastate him on a profound personal level. In a film with more patience and less relentless forward momentum, Ruben's story could have provided fascinating parallel narrative to Sonny's redemption arc. Carrie Condon's Kate McKenna suffers from being the film's most underwritten significant character. Condon does everything possible to create a fully realized human being, bringing intelligence, humor, and subtle attraction to her scenes with Pitt. However, the script seems uncertain what to do with her beyond providing occasional technical exposition and vague romantic possibility. In an ideal version of this film, Kate would receive substantial development exploring the challenges women face in the male-dominated world of racing, but F1 only gestures toward these issues without substantively engaging with them. Tobias Menzies appears briefly as the corporate villain Peter Banning, a smarmy investor concerned only with profit margins and return on investment. Menzies plays the role with appropriate oiliness, but the character represents the film's most conventional element, the money-obsessed suit who can't understand the passion and artistry that motivates true competitors. The meta-narrative, Brad Pitt's search for relevance. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of F1 exists in the space between the film itself and the star persona of Brad Pitt. Whether intentionally or not, the movie functions as a meditation on Pitt's own career anxieties and his attempt to remain relevant in a changing Hollywood landscape. Sonny Hayes' journey, a once celebrated talent who disappeared after a traumatic incident, attempting a comeback decades later in an environment that has moved on without him, uncomfortably mirrors Pitt's own situation. The actor's recent personal controversies have damaged his public image in ways that can't be entirely repaired through professional success. Meanwhile, the film industry continues evolving toward new stars, new sensibilities, and new expectations for how celebrities should conduct themselves both on-screen and off. When Sonny insists that racing should be about the pure love of the sport rather than social media metrics and corporate sponsorships, we can hear Pitt advocating for a model of movie stardom that centers artistic achievement and professional craft over tabloid coverage and Instagram followers. This argument has merit and appeals to our nostalgia for an ostensibly simpler era of celebrity. However, the argument also feels somewhat self-serving coming from someone who has enjoyed extraordinary privilege, wealth, and fame for decades. Pitt's advocacy for the old ways can seem less like principled artistic integrity and more like resistance to accountability and changing standards. For acceptable behavior from powerful men, this tension makes F1 a more complicated, interesting text than it might initially appear. The film wants to celebrate Sonny's, and by extension Pitt's, traditional masculine values of stoicism, physical courage, and professional competence. But it arrives in a cultural moment increasingly skeptical of these values, particularly when they're accompanied by an unwillingness to engage with legitimate criticism or evolve beyond outdated attitudes. F1 ultimately succeeds as a spectacular piece of entertainment designed for the theatrical experience. The racing sequences alone justify the film's existence and will satisfy audiences seeking visceral thrills and technical excellence. Joseph Kosinski demonstrates once again his mastery of action cinematography and his ability to stage complex practical sequences with clarity and excitement. However, the film falls considerably short of its apparent ambitions to create a meaningful meditation on legacy, mentorship, and the passage of time. The script's conventional structure and predictable character arcs prevent F1 from achieving the emotional resonance that distinguished Top Gun, Maverick, or the thematic depth that elevated Ford vs. Ferrari beyond mere sports movie mechanics. Brad Pitt delivers a professionally competent performance that nevertheless feels somewhat disengaged, as if he's coasting on charisma rather than fully inhabiting his character. The film's treatment of generational and racial dynamics, while handled more sensitively than similar movies from previous decades, still traffics in problematic assumptions about whose stories deserve centering and whose dreams deserve fulfillment. For audiences seeking a propulsive, well-crafted racing thriller with spectacular action sequences and a satisfying if conventional narrative arc, F1 delivers exactly what it promises. The film looks and sounds spectacular, moves at an appropriately breakneck pace, and provides sufficient character development to make the racing stakes feel meaningful. For viewers hoping for something more ambitious, a racing film that genuinely explores the sport's culture, controversies, and significance, or a character study that deeply examines what drives people to repeatedly risk their lives for glory, F1 will likely disappoint. This is a film content to work within familiar genre conventions rather than challenging or transcending them. F1 2025 represents a solid but unexceptional entry in Brad Pitt's filmography and the racing film genre more broadly. It's a technically accomplished crowd pleaser that doesn't waste your time but also doesn't particularly enrich it beyond providing 2.5 hours of competently executed entertainment. Like a driver who finishes respectably in the middle of the pack, not embarrassing themselves but not threatening for the podium either, F1 completes its race without crashing but also without achieving genuine glory. The propulsive ride it engineers is entertaining enough to recommend, particularly for fans of racing films or Brad Pitt's star persona. Just don't expect it to linger in your memory long after the checkered flag waves and the credits roll. F1 is a film perfectly engineered for its moment, destined to provide adequate thrills before being quickly lapped by the next high-concept action vehicle coming around the bend. In an era where brands and entertainment have become increasingly intertwined, F1 arrives as perhaps the ultimate example of corporate synergy meeting blockbuster filmmaking ambitions. This is a movie that doesn't just feature Formula One racing, it has been officially licensed by the sport itself, with seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton serving as a producer and lending his considerable credibility to the project. The result is a fascinating hybrid, part racing documentary, part melodrama, part recruitment video for the glamorous world of international motorsport, and entirely committed to delivering spectacle at every possible opportunity. Director Joseph Kosinski, fresh off the massive critical and commercial success of Top Gun, Maverick, reunites with major star power in the form of Brad Pitt, whose 60-something cherubic face we see squashed into a safety helmet throughout the film, making his famous features bulge comically inward toward his nose. It's an image that immediately establishes the film's approach, taking itself seriously enough to demand technical excellence and authentic racing footage, while simultaneously embracing the inherent absurdity of watching Hollywood's elite pretend to be the world's fastest drivers. F1 is outrageously cheesy in its plotting and character development, yet simultaneously fiercely and extravagantly shot with a technical prowess that demands to be experienced on the largest possible screen. This contradiction, between narrative simplicity and visual sophistication, defines the entire viewing experience and will likely determine whether individual viewers embrace the film as entertaining escapism or dismiss it as expensive hokum. The nostalgic heart, old guys, young hotshots, and familiar story beats. At its narrative core, F1 traffics in deeply
This comparison might initially seem dismissive, but it's actually quite apt. Both films understand that racing provides an ideal backdrop for exploring themes of legacy, humility, the importance of teamwork, and the question of what truly drives competitors, pun fully intended, to risk everything for victory. Cars approach these themes with earnest sweetness appropriate for family audiences. F1 tackles the same territory with adult attitudes, corporate branding, and the kind of budget that allows for filming during actual Formula One race weekends. The recycled nature of this narrative framework isn't necessarily a weakness. Sometimes familiar stories work precisely because they're familiar, audiences understand the beats, anticipate the emotional payoffs, and can relax into the comfort of watching archetypal characters navigate predictable but satisfying arcs. The question becomes whether the execution brings sufficient freshness, style, or emotional authenticity to justify revisiting well-worn territory. The corporate sheen, when branding becomes part of the spectacle. F1 doesn't apologize for or attempt to disguise its corporate nature. Much like 2023's Barbie, which was similarly licensed by the brand it depicted, this film fully embraces its commercial origins and actually transforms the corporate elements into part of the spectacle itself. The movie gives you the immaculate corporate sheen of modern Formula One in all its polished, sponsor-saturated glory. Real-life race footage features Brad Pitt's character competing in an unreasonably expensive custom race car that becomes a character itself. The tech fetish surrounding these vehicles is lovingly documented, with cinematography that caresses every aerodynamic curve and engineering detail. The film almost makes you forget how amazingly ugly modern Formula One cars actually are. These aren't the elegant, curvaceous machines of racing's golden age but rather aggressively functional carbon fiber constructions optimized entirely for performance with aesthetics as a distant afterthought. Brand names speckle every square inch of every available surface, from the cars themselves to the drivers' suits to the trackside barriers to the team facilities. Rather than feeling intrusive, this commercial saturation actually enhances the authenticity. This is genuinely what the world of Formula One looks like. A hyper-commercialized environment where corporate sponsorship enables the extraordinary technological achievement on display. The simulation graphics are rendered large and prominent, giving audiences visual information about track layouts, racing lines, and competitive positioning. These graphics serve a dual purpose, providing necessary context for viewers unfamiliar with specific circuits while simultaneously evoking the aesthetic of racing video games, tapping into another revenue stream and cultural association entirely.
Perhaps most significantly, the film captures the bizarre occult spectacle of motor racing itself, the almost ritualistic nature of the pre-race preparations, the strange alchemy that transforms mechanical engineering into something approaching art, and the inexplicable human compulsion to pilot machines at speeds that evolution never prepared our bodies to handle. Celebrity cameos and real racing royalty. As a production officially sanctioned by Formula One, F1 enjoys unprecedented access to the sport's biggest names and most iconic venues. Lewis Hamilton doesn't merely serve as producer, he appears in the film itself, receiving a stately walk-on that acknowledges his status as one of the greatest drivers in racing history. Plenty of other big names are glimpsed throughout, lending authenticity and providing knowing moments. For Formula One enthusiasts who can spot genuine racing personalities integrated into the fictional narrative. One particularly telling moment occurs when Brad Pitt's character Sonny Hayes notices Max Verstappen out on the track during competition. "Damn, he's good," Sonny mutters with genuine admiration. It's a line that works on multiple levels, acknowledging Verstappen's real-world dominance of the sport while simultaneously establishing the fictional world's relationship to actual Formula One. Of course, as the film slyly suggests, yes, Max Verstappen is objectively good. He's a multiple world champion with statistical achievements that place him among the sport's all-time greats. But is he a reckless, intuitive risk-taker and old-school motor racing romantic who might get himself killed chasing some undefinable transcendent experience out there on the burning, shimmering tarmac? We may never know, because that romantic mythology belongs to cinema rather than the highly calculated, data-driven reality of modern professional racing. This tension between racing's romantic image and its technical reality runs throughout F1, sometimes acknowledged, sometimes ignored, but always present beneath the surface. Sonny Hayes, the archetypal comeback kid. Brad Pitt plays Sonny Hayes, a supercool driver whose promising career was derailed by a devastating near-fatal crash 3 decades ago. The accident sent Sonny into an extended wilderness period during which, and these biographical details are tantalizingly mentioned but frustratingly never explored in flashback, he apparently reinvented himself as a professional gambler and New York City taxi driver. The mind reels at the possibilities of these unexplored chapters. Sonny Hayes navigating the high-stakes poker rooms of Las Vegas, reading opponents with the same split-second instincts he once used to anticipate competitors' moves on the track. Sonny piloting a yellow cab through Manhattan traffic, finding small moments of speed and precision in the urban chaos. These would have made for fascinating character development and offered Pitt opportunities for the kind of textured performance that has characterized his best work. Sadly, the film has no interest in these detours. We join Sonny's story after he has already gotten himself back together and now freelances as a race car hombre, drifting around in his campervan, signing up for races wherever he can find them, and consistently wowing younger competitors with his crazy attack strategies and wily cunning accumulated over decades of experience. This peripatetic existence establishes Sonny as the embodiment of pure racing passion uncorrupted by commercial considerations. He doesn't need the money, the fame, or the corporate sponsorships. He races because something fundamental in his soul requires the speed, the danger, the competition. It's a romantic characterization that the film wholeheartedly embraces without much critical examination. The team, assembling the familiar pieces. Sonny's return to top-level Formula One competition comes through Javier Bardem, characterized as an old driving buddy who has transitioned from competitor to team owner. Ruben finds himself in desperate circumstances, his struggling team failing to score points and facing potential dissolution. He desperately needs some special old-school magic to revivify his failing operation and believes that Sonny Hayes, despite his age and long absence from elite competition, represents exactly the kind of unconventional solution his conventional team needs. Ruben's decision to offer Sonny a driving slot meets immediate resistance from multiple directions. The nervous disapproval comes from Banning, Tobias Menzies, characterized as a pointy-headed board member and duplicitous creep whose primary concerns are financial rather than competitive. Banning represents the MBA mentality that has infected modern sports, bean counters who understand profit margins but not the intangible passion that actually drives athletic achievement. More personally cutting is the open disdain expressed by Joshua Pearce, Damson Idris, the team's mercurial young driving star who dismissively refers to Sonny as old man. Joshua embodies youthful arrogance combined with undeniable natural talent. He's fast enough to compete at this level but lacks the experience, tactical awareness, and emotional maturity to consistently extract maximum performance. The setup practically writes itself. Is Sonny going to simultaneously exasperate and excite Ruben by breaking all the established rules and challenging conventional racing wisdom? Oh, but yes, absolutely and predictably yes. The supporting cast, finding humanity in the machinery. Rangy, good-humored Sonny soon works his cheeky magic with everyone around him, but the film's secret weapon proves to be his developing relationship with Kate McKenna, the team's technical director. This is a genuinely excellent performance from Kerry Condon, who stamps hard on what might be called the relatability pedal, and without whom Brad Pitt and his admittedly finite range of expressions might have been left floundering in sequences requiring genuine emotional connection. Condon brings intelligence, humor, competence, and subtle romantic possibility to a role that could have easily been reduced to the woman on the team. Kate is established as brilliant in her field, respected by her colleagues, and entirely comfortable holding her own in the male-dominated environment of professional racing. The script wisely avoids making her romantic interest in Sonny her defining characteristic, instead allowing the attraction to develop naturally alongside mutual professional respect. The chemistry between Condon and Pitt feels genuine and earned rather than manufactured by the script. Their scenes together provide the film's most human moments, brief respites from the constant acceleration of racing sequences and team drama. Condon grounds Pitt's sometimes overly stylized performance, creating a relational dynamic that gives audiences genuine emotional investment beyond simply wanting to see the cars go fast. Kate represents the modern face of Formula One, highly educated, technically sophisticated, comfortable with data analytics and computer simulations, yet still capable of appreciating the intuitive, experiential knowledge that Sonny brings from decades of actual racing. Her character bridges the film's central tension between old-school racing romanticism and new-school technical precision. The global racing circuit, from London to Abu Dhabi and beyond. The film follows Sonny and his adopted team as they compete at circuits all over the world, from London's Silverstone to the gleaming futuristic spectacle of Abu Dhabi's Yas Marina circuit, taking in numerous iconic venues in between. Each event receives the same treatment, prefaced with video game-style graphics meticulously detailing the track layout, racing lines, and key characteristics, accompanied by huge sans-serif titles announcing information like, lap 14 inches in typography that screams contemporary sports broadcasting. This global journey serves multiple purposes. On the practical level, it showcases the genuinely international nature of Formula One, a sport that demands participants travel constantly across time zones and continents, racing on dramatically different circuits that each require unique setups and strategies. On the visual level, it allows Kosinski and cinematographer Claudio Miranda to capture the sport's geographic diversity, the different light quality of various regions, the contrasting architectural styles of racing facilities from historic European venues to ultra-modern Middle Eastern showcases.
On the thematic level, this constant movement reinforces Sonny's characterization as a wanderer, someone comfortable existing in temporary spaces, always preparing for the next race, the next challenge, the next opportunity to experience those transcendent moments that only come when pushing machinery and human reflexes to their absolute limits. The arcana of racing, details that delight and bewilder. The film lovingly reproduces the arcana of professional racing, particular details and rituals that define the sport's unique culture. For enthusiasts, these moments provide authenticity and insight. For newcomers, they create a somewhat baffling but undeniably fascinating world with its own logic and conventions. Particularly prominent is the seemingly universal convention of the team meeting where absolutely everyone wears headphones and headset microphones, creating scenes where people sit mere feet from each other yet communicate entirely through electronic mediation. To the uninitiated viewer, this raises obvious questions. Can they genuinely not hear each other without this equipment? Don't other people conducting equally large conference table meetings manage perfectly well without all this technological intermediation? The film doesn't bother explaining these details because, within the world of professional racing, they simply are accepted conventions that team members navigate without conscious thought. This decision to present racing culture without extensive explanation actually enhances authenticity. The film trusts that audiences will either understand from context or simply accept these rituals as part of this specialized world. Other lovingly detailed elements include the precise choreography of pit stops, where teams of mechanics execute synchronized tire changes and minor repairs in seconds rather than minutes. The communication protocols between drivers and race engineers, conducted in specialized jargon that conveys maximum information with minimum words. The data analysis sessions where technicians examine telemetry from every corner, every braking point, every acceleration, searching for fractional improvements that might translate to competitive advantage. For Formula One devotees, these details represent fan service, acknowledgement that the filmmakers have done their homework and respect the sport's complexity. For general audiences, they create texture and specificity, making this feel like a genuine subculture rather than a generic racing backdrop. Intra-team competition. The sport's inherent drama. Motor racing presents a fascinating structural paradox that ought to make it ideal subject matter for dramatic treatment. Constituent team members find themselves competing against each other nearly as much as against the opposition. Formula One teams field two drivers who share equipment, technical support, and ultimately work toward the same organizational goals, yet compete directly for individual glory, championship points, and preferential treatment from the team itself. This creates inherent tension that teams must carefully manage. Do you allow your drivers to race each other freely, potentially resulting in collisions that eliminate both from competition? Do you establish team orders that prioritize one driver over another, potentially demoralizing the designated number 2 driver? How do you balance individual ambition with collective success? F1 acknowledges this dynamic in the relationship between Sonny and Joshua, though it doesn't explore the tension as deeply as it might. The film is more interested in the mentor-student relationship than in the genuine competitive rivalry that would naturally exist between two drivers fighting for the same racing positions and the same team resources. This represents a small missed opportunity. The most compelling racing dramas, films like Rush, which explored the intense personal rivalry between James Hunt and Niki Lauda, understand that interpersonal competition provides the emotional stakes that make racing results genuinely meaningful to audiences who might not otherwise care about motorsport. Macho silliness and directorial panache. There's undeniably a fair bit of macho silliness throughout F1 2025, the ritualized displays of courage, the casual acceptance of potentially fatal danger, the equation of personal worth with competitive success, the limited emotional vocabulary that characterizes many of the male characters. These are familiar elements of sports cinema generally and racing films particularly, rooted in cultural associations between masculinity and mechanical mastery that deserve more critical examination than they typically receive. However, the considerable panache with which director Joseph Kosinski assembles all these elements proves genuinely entertaining even for viewers who might intellectually object to some of the film's underlying assumptions. Kosinski demonstrates once again, following Top Gun, Maverick, that he possesses an almost supernatural ability to craft action sequences that are simultaneously viscerally exciting and spatially coherent. The racing cinematography in F1 represents some of the finest ever captured, benefiting from unprecedented access to actual Formula One events and custom camera equipment designed specifically for this production. We experience racing from perspectives previously impossible. Cameras mounted on cars capturing the driver's viewpoint, impossibly smooth tracking shots following vehicles through complex sequences of corners, dramatic overhead compositions that reveal the geometric beauty of multiple cars navigating the same racing line. Kosinski's background in architecture, he holds a degree from Columbia University, manifests in his compositional sensibility. Even at extreme speeds, his frames maintain visual balance and clarity. We always understand spatial relationships between competing cars, the racing line through upcoming corners, and the strategic choices drivers make in real time. The editing, handled by Eddie Hamilton, maintains this clarity while delivering appropriate kinetic energy. Racing sequences feel genuinely fast without devolving into incomprehensible chaos. We can follow individual overtaking maneuvers, understand the strategies being employed, and appreciate the skill required to execute these moves at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. Kerry Condon, the vital fuel ingredient. Kerry Condon's performance as Kate McKenna deserves special recognition as what might be called the vital fuel ingredient that allows the entire enterprise to function properly. To viewers approaching F1 as non-believers in motorsport mythology, Condon provides the essential human connection that makes the increasingly surreal racing spectacle emotionally accessible. Condon brings naturalism to a film that frequently threatens to disappear into stylized abstraction. Her Kate feels like an actual person with interior life, professional pressures, personal desires, and the kind of complexity that most of the male characters lack. When Kate expresses frustration with team politics, we believe it. When she experiences excitement about a technical innovation, we share it. When she looks at Sonny with attraction complicated by professional considerations, we understand the conflict. The Irish actress, recently Oscar-nominated for her supporting role in The Banshees of Inisherin, demonstrates remarkable range in transitioning from that film's dark folk tale atmosphere to F1's corporate racing environment. She makes the technical dialogue sound natural, which is considerably more difficult than it might appear. When Kate discusses aerodynamic modifications or tire compound strategies, Condon delivers these lines with the casual fluency of someone for whom this vocabulary is simply part of professional life. Most importantly, Condon creates genuine chemistry with Pitt despite their characters' age difference and the inherent power dynamics of their respective positions. The script wisely avoids making Kate subordinate to Sonny in either narrative importance or professional competence. She's the technical expert, he's the driving expert, and their mutual respect forms the foundation for developing attraction. Without Condon's performance grounding the film's emotional reality, F1 might have become merely a spectacular but hollow technical exercise. Her presence ensures that audiences invest in the characters as people rather than simply rooting for abstract competitive success. The surreal spectacle, making sense of modern motorsport. For the uninitiated viewer, for someone approaching Formula One without deep prior knowledge or emotional investment, the entire enterprise can seem surreal, a bizarrely elaborate ritual where obscenely wealthy corporations spend hundreds of millions of dollars to make cars go around in circles slightly faster than other cars going around in circles. F1 doesn't really attempt to justify or explain this apparent absurdity. Instead, it fully embraces the spectacular surrealism of modern motorsport and invites audiences to appreciate it on its own terms. The film understands that Formula One functions as much as aesthetic spectacle as athletic competition. The visual beauty of the cars themselves, the dramatic international venues, the ritualized team procedures, the technological innovation that serves no practical purpose beyond making these specific machines perform better at this specific task. There's something almost avant-garde about the film's commitment to reproducing racing's elaborate rituals without extensive exposition. The massive team debriefs with everyone wearing headsets. The complex pre-race procedures. The seemingly arbitrary rules governing car specifications and race procedures. The film presents all of this as simply the reality of this world, trusting that the commitment and seriousness with which the characters approach these rituals will convince audiences of their importance.
This approach paradoxically makes F1 more accessible than a film that attempted extensive explanation of motorsport technicalities. By treating Formula One as its own complete universe with internal logic that doesn't require justification, the film allows viewers to simply immerse themselves in this world without constantly stopping to explain why things work the way they do. The result feels surreal and spectacular in equal measure, a heightened reality that acknowledges its own absurdity while simultaneously demanding to be taken seriously. Technical achievement, the real star of the show. While Brad Pitt receives top billing and the marketing emphasizes his star power, the genuine star of F1 might be the technical filmmaking itself. This is a production that reportedly cost over $300 million, and unlike many bloated blockbusters where the budget seems to have disappeared into executive salaries and marketing, you can genuinely see that money on screen. The racing cinematography, as previously discussed, sets new standards for the genre. The production employed custom camera systems developed specifically for this film, including ultra-lightweight devices that could be mounted on actual Formula One cars during real race weekends. This allowed for genuine racing footage integrated with scenes featuring the actors, creating unprecedented authenticity. The sound design deserves equal recognition. Formula One cars produce a distinctive, almost otherworldly sound, the high-pitched scream of engines operating at extreme RPMs, the whoosh of aerodynamic elements managing airflow at incredible speeds, the rumble transmitted through the chassis. The film's sound team, working with Dolby Atmos technology, reproduces these sounds with startling fidelity while also ensuring dialogue remains intelligible during racing sequences. Hans Zimmer's score complements rather than overwhelms the racing action, providing emotional texture during character moments while wisely stepping back when the sound of the cars themselves provides sufficient drama. Zimmer demonstrates the restraint that separates great film composers from merely competent ones, knowing when music enhances a scene and when it would prove redundant or distracting. The production design creates convincing team facilities, garage spaces, and technical areas that feel lived in rather than constructed specifically for filming. The costumes accurately reproduce racing attire while ensuring the actors remain identifiable even when helmeted. The visual effects seamlessly integrate practical racing footage with digital enhancements, creating composites that prove essentially undetectable to viewers. This comprehensive technical excellence elevates F1 2025 beyond its narrative limitations, ensuring that even viewers who find the story predictable or the characterizations superficial can still appreciate the film as a showcase for state-of-the-art filmmaking craft. Narrative shortcuts and missed opportunities. Despite its considerable technical achievements and charismatic performances, F1 suffers from narrative choices that prioritize forward momentum over character development and emotional depth. The script, credited to Aaron Kruger, who also wrote Top Gun: Maverick, hits all the expected beats but rarely finds moments of genuine surprise or subversion. Sonny's transformation from wandering freelancer to integral team member happens too easily, without sufficient obstacle or complication. His conflicts with Joshua resolve too neatly, following the familiar pattern of initial antagonism giving way to grudging respect and eventual partnership. The romantic tension between Sonny and Kate never quite develops into either consummated relationship or definitively rejected possibility, leaving it in an unsatisfying middle ground. The film also largely ignores the darker aspects of motorsport that might have provided thematic depth. Formula One's troubling safety history receives minimal acknowledgement. The sport's environmental impact goes completely unmentioned despite increasing real-world criticism. The enormous wealth disparities between top teams and struggling operations are depicted but never examined critically. The sport's complicated relationship with autocratic regimes that host races receives no attention. These omissions feel like missed opportunities to ground the personal drama in larger contextual significance. Ford vs. Ferrari succeeded partly because it explored corporate politics and the tension between artistic vision and commercial demands. Rush worked because it examined the psychological cost of pursuing excellence in an activity that could casually kill you. F1 remains resolutely focused on individual redemption without much consideration of the larger world in which that redemption occurs. The film also rushes through what should be significant emotional moments. Sonny's first race back at elite level after decades away should feel momentous, yet the film treats it as just another race on the calendar. Joshua's evolution from arrogant hothead to team player happens largely off-screen between races rather than through depicted experiences that change his perspective. The Brad Pitt factor. Brad Pitt remains one of the world's biggest movie stars, a status he's maintained for over 3 decades through a combination of undeniable charisma, generally smart project choices, and genuine acting ability when properly motivated. In F1, Pitt delivers exactly the performance the film requires: charming, physically credible, sufficiently vulnerable in key moments, and capable of selling the racing sequences as genuinely dangerous. However, this role also highlights Pitt's limitations when working with material that doesn't challenge him. His range of expressions, as previously noted, is finite. He has a handful of reliable character notes: rueful amusement, quiet determination, explosive anger, melancholy reflection, that he plays with considerable skill but which rarely combine into surprising or revelatory performances. Compare Pitt's work here to his best performances in films like The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, Moneyball, or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In those films, Pitt found unexpected shading and complexity, creating characters who felt unpredictable and fully human. In F1, he creates a perfectly serviceable racing movie protagonist who never quite transcends the archetype. Part of this limitation stems from the script, which doesn't give Sonny sufficient contradiction or internal conflict. He's essentially the same person at the end of the film as at the beginning, the same values, the same priorities, the same worldview. He experiences external success by helping his team improve, but he doesn't undergo significant internal transformation. Pitt at 61 is undeniably aging, and the film both acknowledges and attempts to deny this reality. We see his weathered face squeezed into the helmet, the physical toll of racing on his body, the younger competitors who view him as a relic. Yet the film also insists that Sonny retains all his capabilities, that experience and cunning compensate for any diminished physical capacity, that age brings wisdom without corresponding decline. This negotiation between acknowledging and denying aging reflects broader cultural anxieties about masculine potency and relevance. The film wants to celebrate the older generation while making space for the younger, but it doesn't quite know how to do both simultaneously without diminishing one or the other. F1 ultimately delivers precisely what it promises: a spectacular, technically brilliant, narratively conventional racing film that provides visceral thrills without demanding much intellectual or emotional engagement. For audiences seeking pure entertainment and the opportunity to experience Formula One racing from perspectives previously impossible, the film succeeds admirably. Joseph Kosinski confirms his status as one of contemporary cinema's finest action directors, someone capable of staging complex practical sequences with visual clarity and kinetic excitement. The racing sequences alone justify the film's existence and will satisfy motorsport enthusiasts and casual viewers alike. Kerry Condon emerges as the film's MVP, providing emotional grounding and human connection that prevents the film from disappearing entirely into spectacular abstraction. Her chemistry with Pitt creates the film's most genuine moments and gives audiences emotional stakes beyond simply wanting to see cars go fast. However, the film's narrative conventionality and superficial characterization prevent it from achieving the cultural impact or lasting significance of racing cinema's best entries. F1 will entertain for its considerable runtime and then largely fade from memory, replaced by the next expensive spectacle coming around the bend. For Formula One believers, the film provides loving acknowledgement of the sport's rituals, personalities, and spectacular nature. For non-believers, it offers surreal and spectacular entertainment that doesn't quite justify its own existence beyond providing expensive thrills. F1 is a solidly entertaining, technically superb, narratively predictable racing film that knows exactly what it wants to be and achieves those limited ambitions with considerable skill. It's a film that earns qualified recommendation. See it on the biggest possible screen for maximum impact, enjoy the spectacular racing sequences, appreciate
Brad Pitt's racing epic F1 the movie had finally arrived in theaters, and it's a film that demands our attention not just for its spectacular racing sequences and technical achievements but for the complicated thematic terrain it navigates beneath all that high-octane spectacle. This is a movie that wears its influences proudly on its sleeve while simultaneously trying to carve out its own identity in the crowded landscape of sports cinema, and the results are simultaneously exhilarating and deeply troubling depending on which aspects you choose to focus on. Director Joseph Kosinski, who previously demonstrated his mastery of legacy sequels and visceral action with Top Gun Maverick, brings that same technical precision and visual flair to the world of Formula One racing, creating what is undeniably one of the most spectacular racing films ever committed to celluloid. But underneath all that visual magnificence lies a narrative that grapples with questions of purpose, obsession, community, and what we sacrifice in pursuit of the things that make us feel most alive, and it's here where the film becomes genuinely fascinating and occasionally frustrating in equal measure. At the heart of F1 the movie is Sonny Hayes, played with weathered charisma by Brad Pitt, a character who embodies both the film's greatest strengths and its most troubling contradictions. Sonny is introduced to us as a man who has made many mistakes throughout his complicated life, mistakes that the film wisely doesn't spend too much time cataloguing in tedious expository flashbacks but instead allows to exist as texture and history that informs who this man has become. What immediately distinguishes Sonny as a protagonist, what makes him worthy of our attention and potentially our admiration, is that he doesn't shy away from acknowledging these past failures and missteps. He doesn't make excuses for himself or attempt to rewrite his personal history into something more palatable or heroic. Instead, he simply moves forward with a kind of determined pragmatism, always trying to do better, always attempting to learn from what came before, embracing what becomes something of a personal mantra that echoes throughout the film: new day, new challenge. It's a philosophy that speaks to resilience and adaptability, to the idea that our past doesn't have to define our future, that redemption is always possible if we're willing to put in the work and make different choices. This mindset makes Sonny immediately sympathetic despite whatever murky history the film hints at but never fully reveals. The central narrative hook that propels the film forward involves Sonny's unexpected return to the elite world of Formula One racing, and what's genuinely refreshing about how the film handles this setup is that Sonny's motivations are presented as complex and multifaceted rather than simplistically focused on personal glory or egotistical validation. Yes, he's definitely intrigued by the opportunity to get back into F1 2025 and prove that he still possesses the skills, the reflexes, the instincts that once made him a formidable competitor. There's clearly a part of him that wants to demonstrate to himself and to a world that has largely forgotten him that he remains relevant, that he can still compete at the highest level despite his age and the years he's spent away from the sport. But what the film takes care to establish is that Sonny is equally if not more invested in winning because it will help his old friend and former rival Ruben save the struggling Apex team. This isn't just about corporate survival or protecting some billionaire owner's investment portfolio. Ruben is portrayed as a genuine team builder who has created employment for many people, mechanics and engineers and support staff who depend on Apex for their livelihoods and their professional identities, and Sonny genuinely cares about helping preserve those jobs and that community. It's a motivation that immediately elevates the stakes beyond simple personal redemption and connects Sonny's individual journey to a larger collective enterprise. What really distinguishes Sonny as a protagonist worthy of our emotional investment is how genuinely he cares for his teammates, not just the other drivers but the entire crew and staff at Apex, the people who work largely behind the scenes making the spectacular racing action possible. The film takes time, precious time that many blockbusters would simply devote to additional action sequences, to show Sonny actively building camaraderie with these people, learning their names, understanding their roles, appreciating their contributions to the collective effort. There's a particularly affecting scene where Sonny notices a crew member struggling with his responsibilities during a pit stop, the kind of fractional delay that can cost crucial seconds and potentially determine race outcomes, and rather than berating this person or demanding his replacement, Sonny takes time to encourage him, to build his confidence, to help him understand that mistakes are part of learning and that the team believes in his ability to improve. It's a small moment, easily overlooked amid all the spectacular racing action, but it speaks volumes about who Sonny is as a person and a leader. He understands that teams are built through support and encouragement rather than fear and intimidation. The relationship between Sonny and Joshua, the team's younger driver, provides the film's primary emotional and dramatic arc, and it follows a trajectory that will feel familiar to anyone who has watched sports movies over the past several decades. Initially, Sonny has absolutely no interest in mentoring the talented but inexperienced and frankly arrogant Joshua, who represents everything about modern racing and modern celebrity that Sonny finds distasteful and disconnected from what he considers the pure essence of the sport. Joshua is focused on his social media presence, his brand partnerships, his follow accounts, all the external validation metrics that have nothing to do with actual racing performance but everything to do with contemporary athletic celebrity. From Sonny's old-school perspective, this represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what racing should be about, a corruption of purpose that prioritizes fame over craft, image over substance, personal glory over collective achievement. He wants nothing to do with being responsible for this kid's development. But of course, as the film progresses and circumstances force these two very different people into closer collaboration, Sonny gradually and somewhat reluctantly begins filling that mentoring role, and once he commits to it, he does so with gusto, with the same full-hearted dedication he brings to everything else. The transformation feels earned rather than perfunctory because the film takes time to show us the specific moments and interactions that gradually change Sonny's perspective on Joshua and Joshua's perspective on what racing can and should mean. Joshua himself emerges as a more complex and sympathetic character than the initial setup might suggest, and a significant portion of that complexity comes from the fact that he's being pulled in many different directions by people with competing interests in his career and his future. His manager, operating from pure business logic, encourages Joshua to look out for himself and his own career prospects, particularly given Apex's seemingly imminent demise as a competitive team. From this perspective, loyalty to a failing organization makes no sense when other teams with better equipment and more resources are potentially interested in signing him. It's the rational, self-interested choice that any sports agent would recommend to a client with Joshua's talent and potential. But as the film progresses, we watch Joshua's commitment to the Apex team genuinely grow, transforming from simple contractual obligation into something deeper and more meaningful, a sense of belonging and collective purpose that proves more satisfying than individual achievement. The film gives us a genuinely affecting moment where Joshua turns down an objectively attractive offer to jump ship to a more successful team, choosing to stay with Apex not because it makes business sense but because he's developed genuine loyalty to these people and this community that has invested in his development. It's a choice that speaks to character growth and evolving priorities, to the discovery that some things matter more than maximizing personal advantage. The film also takes care to show us that Joshua shares a close relationship with his mother, a relationship characterized by love, support, and when necessary, correction and honest feedback. These scenes provide crucial context for understanding who Joshua is beneath the arrogant exterior he presents to the racing world. His mother clearly loves him deeply and takes pride in his accomplishments, but she's also willing to call him out when his behavior becomes selfish or short-sighted, when his focus on personal glory threatens to undermine the very qualities that made him successful in the first place. She reminds him about humility, about gratitude, about remembering where he came from and the people who supported him before the fame and the sponsorships arrived. These maternal interventions provide Joshua with grounding and perspective that he desperately needs, and they also humanize him in ways that make his eventual transformation feel psychologically credible rather than simply required by sports movie formula. He's not just learning from Sonny's racing wisdom but also carrying forward values his mother has been trying to instill in him all along. Over the course of the film's substantial runtime, Sonny and Joshua learn to work together in increasingly sophisticated ways, developing the kind of intuitive understanding that allows teammates to anticipate each other's moves and strategies without extensive verbal communication. More importantly, they both learn to sacrifice personal glory for the good of the team, to subordinate individual statistics and achievements to collective success. This is presented as genuine character growth for both of them, but particularly for Joshua, who begins the film as someone constitutionally incapable of thinking beyond his own interests and ends it as someone who understands that individual excellence means nothing if it doesn't contribute to something larger than himself. The other members of Apex, including team owner Ruben and technical chief Kate, undergo similar journeys of pushing themselves beyond what they thought possible and adapting their contributions to better serve the collective enterprise. Kate in particular emerges as a fascinating character, a brilliant engineer who must navigate the male-dominated world of motorsport while also learning to balance technical precision with the kind of intuitive risk-taking that Sonny represents. The film wisely avoids making her simply a love interest for Sonny, though there's definitely romantic tension between them, and instead allows her to function as a fully realized character whose professional journey parallels and intersects with the driver's narratives.
The film includes several sequences that showcase genuine heroism and selflessness, moments that remind us that racing, for all its competitive individualism, also requires courage and concern for fellow competitors. After a particularly devastating crash that sends flames erupting from twisted metal, we witness someone bravely pulling another driver from the flaming wreckage, risking their own life to save a competitor, someone they were literally trying to beat just moments earlier. It's a powerful reminder that these drivers, despite their on-track rivalries, share a bond forged through mutual understanding of the dangers they face every time they climb into these incredibly fast and inherently dangerous machines. In another affecting sequence, a team owner refuses to let someone race specifically to protect his friend from injury or worse, prioritizing personal relationship over competitive advantage and potential championship points. These moments of genuine human connection and concern provide necessary emotional counterweight to the aggressive competitiveness that defines most of the racing sequences. We also see a racer getting serious about his craft in ways he previously avoided, finally starting to shut out the distractions and external noise that had been hurting his performance, choosing substance over image, craft over celebrity. There's even a brief but affecting scene of a father lovingly interacting with his children, a reminder that these people exist in full human contexts beyond the racing that consumes so much of their attention and energy. The film includes scattered religious and spiritual elements that add texture without becoming preachy or heavy-handed. Sonny kneels and bows his head next to his car several times before races, a ritual that could be interpreted as prayer or simply personal meditation and focus, a moment of centering before the chaos and danger that's about to unfold. He and Ruben talk about needing a miracle to win a particular race given their equipment disadvantages, using language that carries religious connotations even if it's employed somewhat casually. In one exchange, when someone credits the phrase, "Hail Mary," to American football, describing a desperate last-second attempt to snatch victory from seemingly certain defeat, Sonny corrects him, explaining that it was originally a religious term borrowed from Catholic prayer tradition. These small moments suggest that Sonny, despite whatever moral complications exist in his past, maintains some connection to spiritual or religious frameworks, even if that connection exists more as cultural inheritance than active faith practice. Ruben at one point jokingly refers to the racing gods, invoking the semi-serious superstitions that pervade motorsport culture, while another character goes by the nickname Zeus, suggesting mythological aspirations or perhaps just acknowledging the outsized personalities that populate this world. There's also a visually striking sequence where a large and architecturally magnificent mosque features prominently in the background of a particular race, a reminder of the global and multicultural nature of modern Formula One racing. The film doesn't shy away from moral complexity, particularly regarding Sonny's approach to racing itself. He's portrayed as a wily and experienced racer, someone who knows every trick and stratagem accumulated over decades of competition, but his tactics, especially early in the film before his character growth really takes hold, definitely toe the line between clever strategy and what might more honestly be called dirty pool. He's willing to use borderline illegal or at least ethically questionable moves to gain advantage, to intimidate younger drivers, to exploit gaps in the regulations that govern fair competition. The film presents this moral ambiguity without necessarily condemning it, recognizing that the line between competitive cunning and unethical behavior is often blurry in high-stakes athletics. We also learn that Sonny once struggled with a gambling problem, another detail that adds complexity to his character without being extensively explored or resolved. Several characters wager money on race outcomes throughout the film, a reminder that sports exist within larger ecosystems of betting and financial speculation that sometimes corrupt the purity of athletic competition. The film includes a subplot involving corporate sabotage and manipulation that adds tension beyond the on-track competition. Someone deliberately forges documents and submits false claims about the Apex team to racing authorities, a calculated attempt to sabotage their season through bureaucratic interference rather than superior performance. This storyline, while somewhat underdeveloped, reminds us that modern motorsport exists at the intersection of athletics and big business, where competition happens both on the track and in boardrooms and regulatory hearings. We also see a driver continuing to race despite risking serious health issues, pushing his body beyond what's medically advisable because the compulsion to compete overwhelms rational self-preservation. The film presents this as simultaneously admirable dedication and troubling obsession, never quite resolving whether we should celebrate this commitment or be concerned about the psychological dysfunction it might represent. From a purely technical and aesthetic perspective, F1 the movie represents an absolute triumph of contemporary blockbuster filmmaking. Director Joseph Kosinski, who previously demonstrated his mastery of legacy sequels and kinetic action with Top Gun Maverick and his distinctive visual sensibility with Tron Legacy, has crafted a visually stunning, pulse-pounding racing film that stands among the finest examples of motorsport cinema ever produced. The racing sequences are absolutely extraordinary, benefiting from unprecedented access to actual Formula One events and custom camera systems developed specifically for this production. Kosinski and his collaborators have found ways to capture racing from perspectives previously impossible, placing audiences directly in the cockpit alongside drivers as they navigate courses at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, experiencing every vibration, every split-second decision, every moment of terror and exhilaration. The cinematography by Claudio Miranda creates images of genuine beauty even amid the chaos of competition, finding elegant compositions in the geometric patterns created by racing lines and the balletic choreography of multiple cars navigating the same corners. The sound design deserves equal recognition, reproducing the distinctive scream of Formula One engines and the complex acoustic environment of racing with startling fidelity that makes you feel like you're actually trackside or better yet inside the car itself. Beyond the technical achievements, the film also packs in a propulsive plot that maintains forward momentum throughout its considerable runtime and compelling characters who feel like more than simple archetypes required by sports movie formula. While the film certainly doesn't break any revolutionary new ground in the well-worn sports movie genre, it delivers on all the expected beats quite well, hitting the familiar narrative markers with sufficient skill and emotional authenticity that they feel satisfying rather than tired. There's the initial skepticism about the aging competitor's comeback, the friction between different generations and philosophies. The underdog team struggling against better-funded opponents, the crucial race where everything comes together or falls apart, the personal sacrifices required to achieve collective success. All of these elements appear in F1 the movie, and all of them are executed with professional competence and occasionally genuine inspiration. It's a thrilling movie in the most fundamental sense, a film that generates authentic excitement and adrenaline through its racing sequences and narrative stakes. Inspiring, even, in its depiction of people pushing themselves beyond their perceived limitations and discovering capabilities they didn't know they possessed. But despite all these considerable achievements, despite the technical brilliance and the propulsive storytelling and the compelling performances, the message presented by the film's conclusion left me feeling unexpectedly cold and troubled, raising questions that the film seems either unwilling or unable to adequately address. The ending, which I'll discuss carefully to avoid complete spoilers while still engaging with its thematic implications, presents a vision of Sonny's future that feels simultaneously inevitable and deeply problematic, revealing assumptions about masculinity, purpose, and fulfillment that deserve more critical examination than the film provides. No one drives forever. This pronouncement comes from one of the supporting characters, spoken with a weight of obvious truth, a simple acknowledgement of biological and physical reality that applies to all athletes regardless of their talent or dedication. Bodies age, reflexes slow, the competitive edge that separates elite performers from merely excellent ones gradually erodes until one day it's simply gone. This is the universal truth that all athletes must eventually confront, the end that comes for everyone regardless of how desperately they try to postpone it. And yet Sonny Hayes remains determined to try to drive forever, or at least for as long as humanly possible, to extract every last moment of competition from a body and a life that can't sustain this intensity indefinitely. He's chasing a feeling that, for him, only racing can provide, a sensation he describes as flying, a moment of transcendence and pure present-tense existence that nothing else in his life has ever replicated. It makes him happy in ways that other pursuits and relationships apparently cannot. He would say, if pressed to articulate it honestly, that he genuinely needs this feeling the way other people need food or water or human connection, that without it his life feels incomplete and purposeless. The film shows us how Sonny uses this pursuit, this possibly pathological need for the racing high, for the benefit of the Apex team and everyone connected to it. His personal drive and obsessive commitment serve as the catalyst for Apex to reach another level of performance, exactly as Ruben had hoped when he recruited his old friend back into Formula One. Sonny does tremendous good through his presence and his influence. He mentors Joshua effectively, transforming an arrogant but talented kid into a genuine team player and more complete driver. He inspires the crew to exceed their previous standards. He pushes the technical team to innovate in ways they hadn't previously considered. He helps save jobs and preserve a racing organization that matters deeply to many people. These are real and substantial positive outcomes that flow directly from Sonny's return to racing. But by the end of the film, Sonny himself hasn't fundamentally changed. He's still chasing the same fleeting feeling he was pursuing at the beginning, still looking for that next racing high, that next moment of transcendence that will make him feel truly alive. He, clearly will never truly capture and hold on to this feeling permanently. It's ephemeral by nature, existing only in those specific moments of competition and then immediately dissipating once the race concludes, leaving him empty again until the next opportunity. But the film still leaves us with the distinct impression that, for Sonny, it's specifically this endless chase that matters, the perpetual pursuit rather than any achievable destination. As he puts it, with something between determination and resignation, he has more dragons to slay, framing his continuing racing career as a heroic quest rather than a potentially destructive addiction. It's an interesting and potentially quite problematic message for a major Hollywood film to embrace so uncritically. While Sonny's new day, new challenge mindset can certainly be admirable in many contexts, representing resilience and adaptability and refusal to be defeated by setbacks, his fundamental drive to keep racing feels less like healthy ambition and more like an affliction, a compulsion that has taken control of his life rather than something he controls and directs toward meaningful ends. Watching the film, I couldn't help but think carefully about what exactly Sonny has sacrificed to continue his solitary, self-appointed quest for racing glory and that ineffable feeling of flying. The casualties of his obsession are never fully catalogued, but they're clearly visible in the negative space of what's absent from his life. Colleagues who might have become genuine friends if Sonny had been capable of maintaining relationships outside the racing context. Friendships that could have provided support and meaning beyond the track, but which Sonny apparently let dissolve because they couldn't compete with his racing obsession. Love, romantic partnership, the possibility of building a life with someone rather than perpetually wandering alone in his camper van from one race to the next. The film hints at potential romance between Sonny and Kate, the technical director played with warmth and intelligence by Kerry Condon, and there's genuine chemistry between them, moments of connection that suggest real compatibility. But Sonny never fully commits to exploring that possibility, never allows himself to be vulnerable enough to build something lasting, because doing so would require prioritizing something other than racing, would demand emotional availability and presence that his obsession simply won't permit. The film's ending genuinely wouldn't feel out of place in a classic old western, those mythologized tales of American masculinity and frontier independence. Sonny is the lone gunslinger who, after successfully besting the villain and cleaning up the town and making everything right for the community that briefly depended on him, simply rides off into the sunset seeking more adventures and deliberately leaving behind the friends he has made and the community that has embraced him. It's a deeply American mythology, this idea of the solitary hero who can never settle down, never build roots, never commit to anything beyond the next challenge and the next horizon. We're supposed to find this romantic and heroic, this refusal to be domesticated or confined, this perpetual movement toward the next frontier. And there's certainly something compelling about this archetype that explains its persistence in American storytelling across generations and genres.
But from another perspective, one that the film never quite allows itself to fully embrace, this ending reads as deeply tragic rather than triumphant. Sonny has helped other people build community and find purpose and meaning in collective achievement, but he remains constitutionally incapable of participating in that community himself except temporarily and superficially. He's condemned by his own psychology and his addiction to the racing high to perpetual wandering, perpetual solitude, perpetually chasing something he can never actually catch and hold. He will grow older, his reflexes will continue to deteriorate, his body will accumulate damage from crashes and the simple physical toll of racing, and eventually he will no longer be able to compete at the level his identity requires. And then what? The film doesn't want to contemplate that inevitable endpoint, preferring instead to freeze Sonny in this moment of renewed purpose and capability, riding off toward more dragons without acknowledging that the dragons will eventually win simply through the passage of time. This romanticization of obsessive pursuit at the expense of human connection and community belonging represents a troubling message, particularly in contemporary culture where loneliness and isolation have reached epidemic proportions and where we are increasingly recognizing that individualistic achievement provides far less fulfillment than genuine human connection and community participation. The film seems to suggest that for certain special people, for those gifted with particular talents and driven by particular obsessions, normal human needs for relationship and belonging simply don't apply, that their pursuit of excellence and transcendent experience justifies any sacrifice and any isolation. But this is a dangerous mythology that has destroyed countless lives and left many talented people profoundly unhappy despite their achievements. Viewer will absolutely have to grapple with this message and decide for themselves whether they find Sonny's ending triumphant or tragic, liberating or imprisoning. This interpretive challenge exists alongside other content considerations that parents and more sensitive viewers should consider before deciding whether F1 the movie is appropriate for them or their families. The film contains harsh language throughout, with various profanities deployed with the casual frequency typical of contemporary PG-13 releases and occasional stronger language that pushes against those rating boundaries. There are some mildly suggestive situations, romantic tension that occasionally becomes physical though never explicitly sexual, the kind of adult content that acknowledges these characters as sexual beings without dwelling on or exploiting the dimension of human experience. The racing sequences, while spectacular, also include some genuinely frightening crashes with cars disintegrating and catching fire, moments that accurately represent the very real dangers these drivers face but which might prove intense for younger or more sensitive viewer. The question each potential viewer must answer is whether F1 the movie represents a race worth taking given these various bumps in the road, whether the spectacular technical achievements and compelling performances and genuinely exciting racing sequences outweigh the problematic thematic conclusions and content considerations. For racing enthusiasts and fans of spectacular action cinema, the answer is almost certainly yes. This is one of the finest racing films ever made from a pure technical and visceral perspective, a movie that puts you in the cockpit and makes you feel the speed and danger and exhilaration of Formula One competition. For viewers seeking more thematic depth and psychological complexity, viewers who want their blockbusters to grapple seriously with the questions they raise rather than simply presenting obsessive behavior as romantic heroism, the film may prove more frustrating despite its considerable achievements. It's a movie that succeeds brilliantly on some levels while remaining troublingly superficial on others. A spectacular ride that doesn't quite know where it's going or why the destination matters beyond the simple thrill of speed itself. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's also not the ringing endorsement that the marketing machine behind this film is hoping for. So let's dig into what works, what doesn't, and whether F1 is worth your $15.20 plus concessions this summer. What I expected going in. Before I even bought my ticket, I had a mental checklist of what an F1 racing movie starring Brad Pitt, directed by the guy who made Top Gun, Maverick, and produced by the guy behind the original Top Gun would look like. I expected gorgeous, high-octane cinematography of Formula One cars doing what Formula One cars do best. I expected a threadbare plot stretched over that spectacle like a tarp over a race car in the paddock. I expected wall-to-wall product placement, because let's be honest, that's just baked into the DNA of both Formula One as a sport and this kind of studio tentpole. And I expected a movie that functions less as a piece of cinema and more as a 2-hour commercial for the sport of racing itself, and for Formula One specifically. I got all of that. Almost beat for beat. But two things genuinely surprised me, and I want to lead with those because they're the most interesting part of this review. First, the dialogue, especially the banter between characters, was sharper and funnier than I braced for. Second, Javier Bardem is in this movie, and he's not just in it, he's a major player. Javier Bardem's underrated role in F1 2025. I want to be clear that this isn't some hidden twist I'm spoiling for you. Bardem plays Ruben Cervantes, the owner of the fictional F1 2025 team at the center of the story, APXGP. He's the man who tracks down Brad Pitt's washed-up former prodigy and talks him into one last shot at Formula One glory. You see Bardem within the first 5 minutes of the runtime, and he remains a central figure for the entire film. And yet, if you've only seen the trailers or the billboards, you'd have no idea Javier Bardem was even in this movie. All of the marketing has zeroed in on Brad Pitt and Damson Idris, who plays the hotshot young teammate Joshua Pearce. Kerry Condon, who plays Apex GT's technical director and has a genuinely important role in the plot, has been similarly buried by the marketing team. She's not a household name on the level of Pitt, sure, but she's a working actress with a real resume, an Oscar nomination among them, and her total absence from the promotional push feels like a real missed opportunity. As for Bardem, he's good here. Genuinely good, charismatic, warm, a little world-weary in the way you'd want the owner of a struggling F1 2025 team to be. I'll admit that every time he's on screen, some part of my brain still flashes back to his terrifying, ice-cold hitman in 2004's Collateral. That's obviously an unfair comparison to hang on this performance, but it says something about how memorable Bardem's darker roles have been that even a warm, mentor-adjacent character can't fully shake that association. A familiar racing movie formula. Let's get into the actual story, because if you are searching for an F1 movie plot summary or trying to decide whether to see F1 in theaters, you need to know what you are signing up for. Brad Pitt plays Sonny Hayes, a former can't miss American Formula One prospect from the 1990s. Back in the day, Sonny was good enough to run with legends. The film puts him on track with Michael Schumacher and the late Ayrton Senna. But before he could ever notch an F1 win, Sonny suffered a horrific, near-fatal crash. He vanished from the sport entirely, resurfacing over the following decades as a
nomadic racer bouncing between series, NASCAR, endurance racing, you name it, never once returning to Formula One.
he's introduced to us living out of a van, the very picture of the mysterious drifter archetype. Enter Ruben Cervantes, Bardem, an old friend and former driver himself, now the owner of APXGP. Cervantes tracks Sonny down and recruits him, not to win races outright, he insists, but to mentor APXGP's other driver, a talented but immature rookie named Joshua Pearce, Damson Idris. Pearce has speed to spare but a self-destructive streak. He's distracted by his off-track lifestyle, quick to blame his engineers when things go wrong, and unwilling to put in the unglamorous work that separates good drivers from great ones. There's a ticking clock built into the premise, too. Cervantes may technically own APXGP, but the team's board can force a sale if the team doesn't secure at least one win by the end of the season, and we are already roughly halfway through it when the movie begins. If you've seen more than a couple of sports movies, you can probably chart the rest of the plot in your head right now. The two drivers clash before they bond. The team hits a rough patch before turning things around. Adversity strikes in the form of crashes and hospital visits. There are inspirational speeches about the purity and beauty of racing. Rinse, repeat, checkered flag. Who made F1? The Top Gun, Maverick connection. Part of what makes this plot so predictable is that F1 was assembled by essentially the same creative team behind one of the biggest movies of the last decade. Joseph Kosinski, who directed Top Gun, Maverick, is in the director's chair here. Jerry Bruckheimer, the producer behind the original Top Gun and the 1990 NASCAR movie Days of Thunder, produced this film as well. And Aaron Kruger, who co-wrote Top Gun, Maverick, returns as screenwriter. Given that pedigree, it's almost inevitable that people are already calling F1 2025, Top Gun on Wheels, a label that, fittingly, was also slapped on Days of Thunder back in 1990. And honestly, the comparison holds up. Like Maverick, F1 centers on an aging, supremely talented mentor with self-destructive tendencies who's paired with a cocky young talent who has self-destructive tendencies of his own to work through before he can reach his full potential. But I'd actually push the comparison further and cross sports entirely. There's a classic, old dog teaches the young buck how to grind, young buck teaches the old dog how to use modern technology, dynamic running through this movie that reminded me less of Jets and more of baseball. Call it Bull Durham on wheels, if you want a comparison that's a little less obvious than the one everybody else is making. What F1 gets right. Let's talk about what actually works here, because there's real craft on display. The racing sequences are the best reason to see this movie, full stop. The cinematography during the actual Grand Prix scenes is genuinely stunning, sweeping, kinetic, and shot with an attention to speed and danger that makes you feel like you're strapped into the cockpit. Kosinski clearly learned a few tricks from shooting aerial dogfights in Maverick and applied them beautifully to ground-level racing. Pair that with a strong, propulsive soundtrack, and the racing scenes alone are close to worth the price of admission. The dialogue is better than expected. This was the biggest positive surprise of the whole movie for me. The banter between characters, particularly the friction and eventual chemistry between Sonny and Joshua, has some real wit to it. It's not Aaron Sorkin level dialogue, but for a summer blockbuster built around a fictional racing team, it lands more jokes than it has any right to. That said, when the film shifts into its more serious, emotional register, the dialogue does get a little corny. You'll roll your eyes at a few of the big speeches. The product placement, while relentless, is almost thematically appropriate. Yes, there's a ton of brand integration throughout F1. But here's the thing, if you've ever actually watched a real Formula 1 race broadcast, you know that the sport itself is a non-stop advertising bombardment. Sponsor logos on every surface, commentators name-dropping partners, drivers doing sponsor obligations mid-broadcast. In a weird way, the constant product placement in this movie makes it feel more authentic to the actual experience of following F1, even if it's also just naked studio commerce. The racing terminology mostly holds up. As someone who doesn't follow Formula 1 closely enough to nitpick every technical detail, I was pleasantly surprised that the movie gets the basics right. Characters talk about understeer, oversteer, tire degradation, and the drag reduction system, DRS, in ways that felt accurate rather than invented for drama. Crucially, we don't get any Fast and Furious style nonsense. Nobody's shifting a 6-speed manual transmission 10 times in a quarter mile, and there's no physics-defying nitrous boost saving the day. On the flip side, the movie also doesn't stop to hold your hand and explain any of this terminology. That's a double-edged sword. It respects the audience's intelligence, but it also means casual moviegoers who get hooked on F1 2025 because of this film are going to need to do some googling afterward to understand what DRS or understeer actually means. F1 fans get plenty of Easter eggs. This is a movie clearly made with the sport's existing fan base in mind. Nearly every current Formula One driver is either named or shown on screen. Real broadcast personalities like Lee Diffie, Will Buxton, and Martin Brundle make appearances, and real F1 executives Zak Brown and Toto Wolff not only appear but actually get lines of dialogue. McLaren's real-world, instantly recognizable headquarters even stands in as the home base for the fictional APXGP team. For anyone who watches Formula One regularly, the film does a genuinely good job of capturing the atmosphere and rhythm of a real Grand Prix weekend. At least from what I've observed as a television viewer. I haven't attended a race in person or covered one as media. There's a solid amount of racing realism woven throughout the film. Honestly, the most unbelievable part of the entire movie might be the idea that Formula One racing is consistently competitive from front to back of the grid. If you follow the sport, you know exactly what I mean by that. Where F1 falls short. Now for the other side of this F1 movie review, because for all its spectacle, the film has some real problems. The story is thin, and worse, it's almost entirely predictable. From the very first act, you can see nearly every major beat coming from a mile away. You know Sonny is going to end up romantically involved with a specific character. You know APXGP is going to turn its season around because of Sonny's influence. About the only genuine surprise in the entire runtime is a subplot involving some underhanded scheming from a member of the team's board. Even the ending, while the exact specifics kept me guessing until the final lap, never deviates from the broad emotional direction you can sense from the opening act. Sonny Hayes' backstory doesn't hold up to scrutiny. This is my biggest issue with the film, and it's one that will probably only bother people who stop to think about it critically. The movie wants us to see Sonny as never was, a talented driver who flamed out and disappeared. But look at what the film actually tells us about his career. He ran competitively with Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher, survived a near-fatal crash, and then went on to have a decades-long career racing successfully across nearly every major motorsport series, including NASCAR. The film even opens with him winning the 24 Hours of Daytona. Think about that for a second. A driver with that resume, someone who was still winning one of the most prestigious endurance races in the world while entering his sixth decade of life, wouldn't be some forgotten failure. He'd be a lock for the Motorsports Hall of Fame, F1 win or no F1 win. I understand what the writers were going for. They needed a reason to explain why someone this talented never won in Formula One and why he vanished from the spotlight. But it might have actually worked better dramatically if Sonny's flaw had been something simpler and more human, say, a self-destructive gambling problem, rather than leaning entirely on the trauma of one crash that the film barely explores beyond a couple of dream sequences and a few brief conversations. That's really the core issue. The movie never fully digs into how that crash affected Sonny's psychology and confidence. It's referenced, it's implied, but it's never actually dramatized in a way that makes his internal struggle feel earned. The central relationship develops too quickly. Sonny and Joshua's arc from rivals to genuine friends and mentor-mentee happens in what feels like a compressed, easy transition. The film needed more space to let that relationship breathe and evolve organically instead of hitting the expected beats on a tight schedule. F1 2025 vs. other racing movies, how does it compare? If you are trying to decide whether F1 is worth watching compared to other racing films, here's where I land. F1 simply can't compete with modern racing classics like Rush, 2013, or Ford vs Ferrari, 2019. Both of those films have a massive built-in advantage. They're based on true stories, and real life often produces better, stranger, more emotionally resonant drama than anything a screenwriter can invent from scratch. Honestly, F1 reminds me most of Days of Thunder, gorgeous racing footage, snappy dialogue, and a paper-thin story that never bothers to develop the emotional core of its lead character. It's a fun, forgettable ride, but it never quite captures why people fall in love with motorsport in the first place, the obsession, the danger, the community of people who drive, wrench on, build, and live for these machines. F1 is exactly the kind of big, glossy summer blockbuster I grew up on in the 1980s and 90s, beautiful action set pieces, breezy and often funny dialogue, and a plot held together with narrative duct tape. It's coherent enough to carry you through a 2-hour runtime, but it starts to fall apart the moment you think about it too critically, or if you already have more than a surface-level understanding of Formula One as a sport. If you're the kind of moviegoer who's fine trading a deep, meaningful story for pure spectacle, gorgeous racing cinematography, a loud soundtrack, and enough charisma from Brad Pitt, Javier Bardem, Damson Idris, and Kerry Condon to carry you through the predictable stretches, then F1 is going to be money well spent. Go see it on the biggest screen you can find, ideally in IMAX. Because the racing sequences genuinely benefit from scale. But if you want something with more emotional depth, something that actually grapples with why people risk their lives for this sport, I'd point you toward Rush, Ford vs Ferrari, or even the classic 1966 film Grand Prix, all of which are currently available to stream and do a better job of exploring the psychology of racing than this film does. Bottom line, F1 delivers exactly what the trailers promise: spectacular racing, movie star charisma, and a story you've essentially seen before under different names. It's a fun, forgettable summer popcorn movie, not a lasting classic. Worth a theater trip for the racing scenes and the surprisingly sharp dialogue, but don't go in expecting anything more than that.